He stepped into the hotel lobby like he didn't belong, because that's exactly how everyone made him feel. His jacket was soft but worn, a shade of beige that once looked new, now dulled by time and weather. His jeans were clean, but faded, and his shoes had the quiet, flattened soles of someone who had walked many streets and never once tried to impress anyone. Over one shoulder, he carried a canvas bag, not the kind used for fashion, but for function. The chandeliers above shimmered, like falling stars. Polished marble echoed with the confident footsteps of people who had reservations, purpose, presence. He had none of those, just a quiet envelope inside his bag, and hoped that someone in this place would care to read it. As he approached the event hall entrance, 2 staff members blocked his way. "Sir, this is a private function," one of them said, voice sharp but polite in that clipped professional way that doesn't wait for an answer. "I'm not here for the party," he said softly, pulling the envelope halfway out of his bag. "I was told someone here might—" "We'll have to ask you to leave. This area is for guests only." Others were watching. A woman in a cocktail dress leaned toward her date and whispered something. A man near the bar turned to get a better look. One of the servers tightened his grip on a tray, sensing the tension. The envelope remained halfway out, unopened, unwanted. He could have insisted, could have raised his voice, but he didn't. He just stood there, eyes moving briefly to the ballroom beyond the glass doors, where lights danced, music floated, and laughter painted the air. For a second, he saw her. Across the room, radiant and poised, the woman he loved stood in conversation, unaware. She hadn't seen him yet. He stepped back. The security guard, misunderstanding his silence, reached out and lightly touched his arm to guide him away. That was when it happened. A bystander took out a phone. Just a few seconds of footage, just enough to capture the discomfort on his face, the kindness in his eyes, and the dismissiveness that met him. He left without arguing, without explaining who he was, without saying her name. But something had shifted. Someone had seen, and 24 hours later, they would all know exactly who he was. Thomas Grayson had always been the kind of man who moved quietly through the world, unnoticed by those who were too busy measuring worth in labels, watches, or posture. He never minded. In fact, he preferred it that way, because when no one is looking, that's when you can do the real work. Years ago, he lived on the streets himself, not because he was reckless or lazy, but because life has a cruel sense of timing. A warehouse fire took his job, his home, and his savings in a single night. He slept under scaffolding for weeks, wrapped in a thermal blanket that made a crinkling sound every time he shifted. He still remembered the sound, still remembered the name of the man who gave it to him, Jared, a fellow soul with broken shoes, and an unshakable laugh. But that season didn't define him. It refined him. From that rock bottom, Thomas built something quietly monumental, Bridge Light. He started it with a folding table, 2 thermoses of coffee, and a stack of handwritten flyers. Over the years, it became a national program, one that combined transitional housing, mental health counseling, and real career support for people who had been pushed to the edges of society. The first apartment Bridge Light ever funded was for a woman named Carmen Liao. She was a former school teacher who'd lost her family in an accident and spiraled into grief and addiction. One night, Thomas found her asleep on the steps of a closed library, clutching a photo of her daughter. He didn't call the cops. He sat down beside her and handed her a sandwich, egg salad, still warm. Then, he just listened. 3 months later, she was sober. 6 months later, she was volunteering. Today, Carmen runs the Bridge Light Transition Center in Providence, Rhode Island. Every Friday, she wears a necklace her daughter made in kindergarten, and every time she talks about Thomas, she pauses. Sometimes she cries. But mostly, she smiles like someone who was pulled from the edge by hands that didn't ask for anything in return. Thomas never told that story to the press. He never told any of them, because to him, that's what help should look like. Quiet, real, and never advertised. At the time of the hotel incident, Bridge Light had expanded to 8 states and had a volunteer network of over 2,000 people. But still, Thomas preferred to walk into his own centers like a visitor. He would sweep the floors, fix leaky pipes, sit beside new arrivals and ask how they were sleeping. He was the founder, but you'd never know it unless someone else told. Even his wife, Vivian, used to mistake him for a janitor the first time they met. She had shown up unannounced to a Bridge Light fundraiser in Seattle, curious after hearing about the program from a friend. Thomas was wearing work gloves and loading chairs into a van. He offered her a bottle of water, said welcome, and kept stacking chairs. She thought he worked for the venue, but something about his calmness stayed with her. 2 weeks later, she returned, this time with questions. Real ones. They talked for hours in the break room of a shelter. She didn't learn his last name until their 4th meeting. She didn't know about his past until their 7th, and by the time she discovered the full scale of what he'd built, she was already in love with the way he listened, the way he never interrupted, and the way he remembered the name of every single volunteer. Now, 4 years into their marriage, Thomas still preferred walking, even when Vivian offered to send a car. He'd choose worn jackets over designer suits, handwritten notes over email signatures, and used bookstores over private clubs. That's why the hotel staff didn't recognize him. He never looked like power. He looked like purpose. The day after the incident at the hotel, Thomas didn't talk about it. He didn't post, didn't vent. He just showed up like always. At the Bridgelight Community Center in Brooklyn, he helped a new volunteer lift boxes of canned goods. He checked in on a resident who'd recently relapsed. And when no one was watching, he stood alone in the back kitchen, his hands resting on the sink, his thoughts louder than the hum of the old refrigerator. That moment in the hotel, it stung, not because of the words spoken, but because of what they implied. That a man who didn't look like wealth was somehow unworthy of being heard. He kept replaying it. The way the hostess had looked through him, not at him. The way the security guard's hand felt on his shoulder, firm but cold. The way his own voice had caught in his throat when he tried to explain. He didn't doubt himself often, but that night he did. Maybe I should have worn the blazer she gave me, the one with the navy lining. What am I doing thinking they'd listen to someone like me? The envelope was still in his bag, still sealed, still heavy. He didn't tell Vivian that morning, not because he was hiding it, but because he knew how fiercely she loved him, how fiercely she hated injustice. And if she knew, she'd react, publicly, loudly, and Thomas wasn't ready for that, not yet. Instead, he walked to the edge of the center's rooftop, a quiet space he'd often use when his thoughts needed air. The sky was gray, but not angry, just tired. Like him, he sat down, pulled out a notebook and scribbled a line from a conversation he'd had with a man named Franklin, an ex-convict who now mentored teens at Bridgelight. People forget, it's not that we want a second chance, we just want to exist without having to prove we deserve to. That line stayed with him, and in that moment Thomas knew something had to shift, not for his pride, but for everyone who'd ever been dismissed the same way. Downstairs, one of the new volunteers, an art student named Mia, asked where the founder was. She'd heard so much about him. Someone pointed to Thomas, who was now standing barefoot in the hallway holding a cup of tea and laughing with a resident. "That's him," they said. "No," she replied, almost laughing. "The real guy, the one who started all this." They insisted. Mia looked again, and in that instant she saw what most people missed. His hands, worn but steady. His posture, unassuming but present. The way people leaned toward him, like plants, toward sunlight. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Vivian noticed something in his eyes. "You went there, didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, just nodded. She set down her tablet, walked over, took his hand. "They treated you badly?" He hesitated. "They treated me like nothing." Vivian inhaled sharply, her jaw tightening. "Let me fix this," she said. But Thomas shook his head. "No, let the truth fix it. Let who we are speak louder than how we're dressed." Vivian understood, not right away, but deeply. The next morning, the video surfaced online. A guest had uploaded it anonymously, captioned, "This man just wanted to help. Watch how they treated him." By noon, it had over 2 million views. By evening, Bridgelight's inbox was flooded with messages, stories, thank yous, donations. By midnight, people were connecting the dots. The man in the hotel was the man who had changed their lives, and the hotel that turned him away, it was owned by his wife. By sunrise, the video had spread to places Thomas had never imagined. A thread on social media began unraveling the mystery. Who was the man in the beige jacket? Some users recognized his face from local news clips. Others remembered a speech he gave at a town hall in Detroit years ago. But the true turning point came when a former Bridgelight beneficiary named Eli uploaded a personal story. He was the boy who once lived behind a laundromat, wrapped in old jackets and hiding from the world. One winter, Thomas had driven 9 hours through a snowstorm just to bring Eli a custom wheelchair and a coat that actually fit. No cameras, no press, just kindness. Eli posted a photo, Him at 16, beaming beside Thomas. The caption read, "You ignored. The man they kicked out of the hotel. I didn't. He saved my life." It exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Podcasters debated it. Celebrities reposted it. And just like that, the man no one noticed became a symbol of everything people were hungry to believe in again. Humility, integrity, purpose. Inside the hotel, things weren't quiet. Staff scrambled. The regional manager scheduled emergency meetings. PR teams drafted statements. But before any of it could go live, someone from the executive suite knocked on the CEO's door. "Vivian, there's something you should see." She watched the footage in silence, the guards, the envelope, Thomas's face. Her face stiffened, not from surprise, but from pain. She stood up, walked to the window and whispered. They didn't even see him. For Thomas, that morning felt different. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't calm either. He was tired, not from the weight of injustice, but from the ache of wondering whether goodness still mattered. He sat alone on the subway, the envelope still in his bag, and stared at a smudge on the window. Maybe I'm a fool, he thought, still believing people can change, still trying to talk to rooms that don't want to listen. He remembered the way the security guard's hand tightened on his arm, not with violence but with certainty, the certainty that he didn't belong. Should I even keep doing this? What if I've just been naive this whole time? The questions echoed louder than any headline. He stepped off at the next stop, walked 3 blocks to the community kitchen, and slipped into the back like always. He washed his hands, tied on an apron, chopped carrots, said nothing. But something had changed. People began showing up outside the center, not for food, but to say thank you. Some brought letters, others brought their kids. One woman simply left a single daffodil on the steps with a note. "You reminded me what good looks like." And then the call came. Vivian's voice, steady but shaken. "I want to go back there," she said. "To the hotel?" "No," she paused. "With you. As us." The car that pulled up in front of the hotel the next day wasn't flashy. It was elegant, understated, just like the couple stepping out of it. Vivian Grayson wore a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, her presence commanding without needing to say a word. Beside her, Thomas adjusted the strap of his familiar canvas bag. He'd worn the same beige jacket, same quiet shoes, same steady walk, but everything else had changed. As they crossed the threshold of the lobby, the same marble floor that once reflected his shame now echoed with silence, an expectant hush. People stared. Phones appeared. The air shifted. A manager approached, visibly nervous. "Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Grayson, welcome." Thomas simply nodded. Vivian didn't break stride. In the grand ballroom where the charity gala had taken place just 2 nights before, a press conference was hastily arranged. Reporters clustered near the back. Staff lined the walls. And in the front row stood 3 women from the Bridgelight board, invited personally by Vivian that morning. Thomas was handed a microphone. He didn't use it. Instead, he stepped forward, removed a folded sheet of paper from his bag, the same envelope they refused, and began to read from it. But the words weren't about shame or vengeance or even justice. They were about value, about how we decide who matters, about how we confuse clothing with character, about the quiet damage done when we look through people instead of at them. "I came here with this," he said, holding up the envelope, "because I believe this place could be part of something bigger, that your name, your brand, could mean more than wealth, that it could mean hope." He paused. "And I still believe that." Gasps echoed from the back. Because who says that? Who returns to the scene of humiliation with grace? Then came the second surprise. A staff member, mid-30s, short sleeves, name tag reading Julian, stepped forward, his face pale. "I need to say something," he said, voice cracking. "I was one of the people who told him to leave, and I'm not proud of that." Murmurs stirred. Julian turned to Thomas. "I didn't recognize you. I didn't think—" He stopped, then pulled something from his pocket. A photo, creased from years of folding. It was of a much younger Julian, thin and hollow-eyed, standing in front of a Bridgelight van. "You gave me a meal in Philadelphia when I was living under a bridge. You helped me get into rehab. You don't remember, do you?" Thomas looked closely. Slowly, he smiled. "I remember your shoes," he said softly. "You'd painted them bright red, said they made you feel alive." Julian laughed through tears. "Yeah, I did." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Vivian stepped beside her husband and placed a hand on his back. "We've decided to partner officially with Bridgelight," she announced. "This hotel and all others under our brand will open their doors monthly to provide shelter, services and job training, effective immediately." Applause erupted, cameras flashed, but Thomas wasn't looking at the press. He was looking at Julian, still stunned, still holding that photo and nodding, because this wasn't about going viral, it was about going visible, for everyone who had been invisible for too long. The press coverage was relentless for days. Headlines ranged from sensational to sincere. The man they ignored was the heart they needed. He had nothing but a message. Now he has the nation listening. Hotel chain humbled by its own founder's husband. But Thomas didn't read them. While reporters gathered outside their home, Thomas spent his mornings walking the East River Trail, his phone on silent, his jacket zipped against the wind. For him, fame wasn't vindication, it was noise. Inside the hotel, however, everything was shifting. Staff training programs were rewritten, customer service manuals were restructured, new directives emphasized empathy, patience, presence, and at the top of every new employee welcome packet, a printed quote from Thomas's speech: "The worth of a person is not in their wallet, but in their willingness to care." Some rolled their eyes at first, others cried when they read it, and among them was Julian. He had requested to stay on, despite the backlash he'd faced online after his emotional confession. Thomas personally insisted that he be protected, not punished. He saw the truth, Thomas had said to Vivian. That matters more than what he missed before. Julian began leading one of the pilot programs, a weekly tour for guests showing them how the hotel's partnership with Bridgelight worked, where donated items went, how the outreach teams operated, what success really looked like. He wore a suit now, still carried the folded photo, but one day as he was guiding a small group past the newly installed community donation center in the lobby, he noticed a woman lingering by the door. She wore thick glasses and a coat far too big for her frame. She looked unsure, like she had entered the wrong place. "Can I help you?" Julian asked. She nodded slowly. "Is this where people like me come for help?" He paused, then smiled. "No," he said gently. "This is where people like us come to be seen." Meanwhile, Thomas remained exactly who he had always been. He still fixed the sink when it leaked at the Brooklyn Center, still made late-night coffee runs for the volunteers, still remembered birthdays of kids from Bridgelight homes by sending them second-hand books with handwritten notes inside. But what had changed, deeply, irreversibly, was how the world responded to him. He was no longer invisible, and in that visibility, he never lost his humility. When asked to give a keynote at a high-profile gala weeks later, he stood in front of a glittering crowd and opened with, "I was once thrown out of a hotel for not looking the part. Now I'm here, invited to speak, because people saw a video. But let me ask you this." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "What if there had been no video? Would I still be here? Would I still matter to you?" The silence that followed was long, uncomfortable, necessary. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind that invites reflection, the kind that cracks the surface of indifference. Thomas continued, his voice low but unwavering. "I'm not here because I want applause. I'm here because I want you to notice the people you step around on your way to these seats, the ones who mop these floors after the music ends, the ones whose names you don't ask, but whose labor fills your glasses and folds your towels." His words didn't accuse, they revealed. Vivian watched from the side of the stage, hands clasped, heart full. This was the man she married, not just kind but conscious, not just humble but bold in the moments that mattered. After the gala, something unexpected happened. Guests didn't rush to their limousines. They lingered. Conversations shifted. Business cards were exchanged, but not for deals, for donations, for partnerships, for possibility. The next day, emails flooded in from executives wanting to replicate the Bridgelight partnership model in their own companies. University. Professors asked Thomas to speak. Documentarians reached out. He declined most of them. Instead, he chose to meet with a group of high school students from a neighborhood where Bridgelight was just beginning. He sat in a circle with them. No microphone, no press, just a box of donuts and a whiteboard. One student, a girl named Aaliyah, raised her hand and asked, "Why didn't you just tell them who you were, that you're married to the owner?" Thomas smiled. "Because if I had to say it out, loud to be treated with respect, then we have bigger problems than my silence." Another student, shy and small-voiced, asked, "Were you scared?" He nodded. "Yes, not because I thought they'd hurt me, but because for a moment, I almost believed them. That confession made the room still, because every student there had felt that too. They talked for hours about dignity, about how judgment feels in the body, about how sometimes the hardest thing is to believe in your own worth when no one else does. Later, one of the teachers would write to Vivian, "Your husband didn't just speak to them, he anchored them. He gave them permission to be more than what they've been told they are." Back at the hotel, the new changes took root. The donation center became a permanent feature. Staff rotated into Bridgelight volunteer days, and once a month, a luxury suite was reserved not for a celebrity, but for a Bridgelight resident transitioning out of homelessness to spend one night experiencing what dignity can feel like when the world isn't watching. And in every one of those rooms on the pillow lay a simple card. It didn't have a logo, just one sentence in Thomas's handwriting: "You are not invisible, and you never were." Some stories end with applause, others with silence, but the stories that linger, those that move something inside you, end with a question. For Thomas Grayson, the question was never, "How do I get recognized?" It was always, "How many people can I lift before I leave this world?" He never wore power like a badge, never raised his voice to demand a seat. Instead, he built tables where everyone had one, especially those forgotten, overlooked, unseen. The lesson in his journey was never about wealth or exposure or poetic revenge. It was about choice. The choice to remain kind in a world that confuses status with substance. The choice to see value in someone before they've proven it. The choice to not turn away when discomfort knocks at the door. And most of all, the choice to stay soft, even when you've been bruised. Thomas's story teaches us that the real revolution is quiet. It's in the man who waits in line with everyone else when he could have walked around, in the woman who asks a stranger's name and remembers it, in the young person who speaks up for someone others ignore. Because the truth is, every day we are writing stories with our eyes. We decide in an instant who matters. But what if we decided differently? What if the man in the jacket isn't a stranger, but someone with 1,000 lives inside him? What if the woman cleaning your table once dreamed of being a doctor and still could be? What if the person you passed today without a second glance is the reason someone else is alive? These aren't hypotheticals. These are truths we miss because we're moving too fast or looking too shallow. So maybe the next time we feel the urge to judge, we pause, we soften, we ask, and maybe we remember Thomas, not because he became known, but because for a moment he helped us see.